So, let us begin. Welcome everybody to Sow Grow Graze number 2. Very excited to have you here again in my home kitchen for this wonderful cooking class, talking all about local food and seasonality. It's a very exciting topic, and it's hopefully going to be a really great session. So, thanks for coming along. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ben Mack. I'm the founder of the Social Food Project. Social Food is a for-purpose business where we combine catering and food events with sustainability education. And so we try to bring these two ideas together in fun and interesting ways. The business is based in Melbourne, but I'm actually in London at the moment. Let's let this person in. 7:30 in the morning here, nice and fresh. And over here doing a Masters of Food Policy, learning about the food system and some of the powers that shape the way that we eat and produce food. We're also joined by the wonderful Chloe Fox. So Chloe is an amazing local producer from Somerset Heritage Produce, which is a farm just outside of Melbourne, and she's going to be sharing her experience with local food. So welcome, Chloe.
Hi, Ben.
Thanks so much for coming along. So before we get into it, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of the City of Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to elders past, present, and future. So this workshop has been made possible through the City of Melbourne Library Department and Health Services. So thank you to the City of Melbourne for making this program possible. Originally, we were going to be hosting these workshops in person with down at Library at the Docks. But of course, because of COVID, we're all trapped in our houses, although they're starting to ease a little bit soon, which is exciting. And so we're hosting them online, which in a way has actually been really great because it means that we can talk to more people. We've got some 34 people on the call at the moment, which is great to be able to talk to more folks. A little bit of housekeeping. So yeah, if you can just keep your camera and your audio on mute, that just helps to speed things along a little bit more. We would love to have some questions and a little bit of conversation going throughout this session. So feel free to pop in any thoughts, ideas, stories, or questions into the chat box that you'll just find at the bottom of the Zoom thing there. I'll have the chat box open on the side as well. So if you've got any questions, I'll just try to answer them live straight away so we can have a little bit more of a conversation. One of the things that I always find in this sort of space is that there's always a lot of wisdom and knowledge in the room. And so I would really love to hear some of the ideas and stories and knowledge from the people that are on this call, not just from myself and Chloe. So please feel free to share as we go along. The session will last for 1 hour. We're going to have around about 10 minutes of chat at the beginning. Then we'll do around about 40 minutes of cooking and chatting, and then we'll have around about 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And then lastly, we're going to be sending around a survey at the end of the session or within the next few days. We would love for you to please fill that out just so you can get an idea about how these workshops are going for you so that we can improve for the rest of the program. All right. Now, still got people coming in. All right, so today we're talking all about local food. Now, what is this thing? What is this local food stuff that people talk about? We hear things like local food is better for the environment. We hear that it is better for food miles. We hear that it's more nutritious and often is more delicious food. What does it actually mean? And so I thought the best way to start this conversation is to ask a local farmer, an actual expert in this space, and hear their thoughts. So I'd love to pass you over to Chloe now, who's going to share her story about her farm.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so my name's Chloe. I run a farm in Seymour, about an hour north of Melbourne. We're right on the banks of the Goulburn River. We've got 4 acres, which translates to a small farm in common terms, but on the scale of what we're doing, it produces quite a lot of food. We're working primarily with hand tools and some tractor power, and we employ, I've got 6 people that work with me on the farm, and we produce a lot of food for local farmers markets, for sale directly to locals and into Melbourne, as well as generally to quite a lot of restaurants. And so my sort of journey into farming, I was a farmer's daughter growing up, but a dairy farmer in New Zealand, and my family left the land and I went down that traditional go to uni, get an office job sort of life, and I just started getting more and more into food. And the more I ate, the more I connected with food, the more I realised what a difference the way food has grown, the intention with which it's grown, the way you connect to food, like how much that is determined by your connection to local farms, to local food, to seasonality, to just like the flavour, the experience of eating food. It's incomparable. Like what you can buy at a supermarket or from a global supply chain, it has nothing like the sense of eating food from your local farmer. I feel really lucky that I was able to connect into this community. Farming, particularly like small scale organic vegetable or other sort of farming, it's a really welcoming community. There's no trade secrets, like everybody wants to share their knowledge. And that's sort of the way I got my start in farming, volunteering and then eventually working on a farm and then taking over that farm for myself. And yeah, it's only increased my love for the food and this style of farming, and just knowing how much more of a connection with food and eating well, and like there are just so many benefits to it. Like the flavor is better, the connection with community, the story of your food, the way you cook with it, you treasure your food. And I think it can only enhance every experience. And we grow organically. We're not certified organic. We haven't gone down the path of certification. It's a lot of paperwork. And for a farm like ours that has a really close connection with their customers, and we're open and transparent, we're very connected into our clientele, so we haven't seen the need to be certified. But yeah, we practice organic, and I would say above organic, where we use some biodynamic methods, as well as like we take a holistic approach towards regenerative farming. So we're looking to not just not do any damage to the soil, but actively enhance our ecosystem, our local community, to grow a biodiverse system. We've got so many different birds, insects, animals living on the farm, and they all contribute to the system. And I
can hear
like
some of those birds now, Chloe. Sounds great.
Yeah, you're actually lucky the cockatoos haven't come out yet tonight. I'll have to go inside if they do. It's pretty noisy around here at some points. But yeah, it's also just wonderful to see those ecosystems thriving on the farm. Like, and you'll see change through the year, different insect and bird populations. It also has an incredible benefit to the farm, having developed those connections with the native ecosystem or natural ecosystem. Like, we don't have, like, there are definitely pests involved in organic farming, but by having a really diverse and balanced biology, you don't see things go out of hand like you would if you were dealing with a monoculture or like a large scale cropped farm that is devoid of other life, and you're spraying to kill things, and like inevitably spraying to kill one thing will lead to the destruction of a chain of biological life. So yeah, you'll kill one thing, but that on purpose, and then you'll destroy an entire ecosystem, really. So by letting our ecosystem, actively promoting our ecosystem as a working, living organism, and allowing it to balance itself with some encouragement. We find it's just the healthiest way to grow. You can taste the difference as well. We grow really diverse crops, and they change from, like, we're never going to have the same thing on our market stall or on our chef list every week. It's going to change markedly through the season. We focus on growing what works best over that season and what works well in our environment. Over the course of a year, I'd grow more than 200 different crops, and that's all in quite a small scale farm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, Chloe. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for coming along on this call. Really appreciate having you here. Okay, so one of the ways that that we can think about local food and why it might be a really great thing is thinking around intention and thinking about what is the intention that underpins these different types of systems. And so if your intention is to create economic value, if your intention is to produce food for export, then of course you're going to make decisions that produce that kind of value. Whereas if you're producing, often local producers are having food that, yes, has economic value. Of course, local farms are businesses, but they're also trying to generate other types of value. They're trying to create, nutritional value for their community, often working with environmental conditions in mind, looking after the farm and generating these other different types of values. And so one way to think about how to think about local food versus, I guess, food for export is this idea of intention. And so playing that down into, for example, looking at a specific example of tomatoes. If you want to produce tomatoes for export, then you really can only choose a couple of different types of tomatoes, ones that are appropriate for export, that can be stored well. Of course, you would use lots of fertilizers and pesticides because that's going to create the best economic value for you. And the idea of flavor or nutrition doesn't really come into it. Whereas if you have these other values and you're thinking, how can we create food and grow food that is good for us, good for our community, and good for the environment, then it opens up lots more doors. So you might choose a tomato that is the juiciest and most delicious thing ever, knowing that if that was for export, then it would just turn to mush in the process. But because you're you're producing food for a local market, you've got much wider options there. And so we're going to keep coming back to this idea of intention that underpins local food. All right, so the dish that we're going to do. One thing that you can do is that if you pin my video, if you click on the little dots up in the corner and then pin it, Chloe and I, we're going to have a little bit of toing and froing. But if you pin it, then it means that that it will stay on the cooking screen, so we can see that. So the dish that we're going to make today has kind of 4 components of it. It's going to be a roasted pumpkin with a burnt orange vinaigrette kind of dressing, with a nut dukkha, and then goat's cheese. So it's a kind of a beautiful sort of seasonal fresh salad of sorts, or side dish. And so each of these steps, each of these 4 things, of kind of teasing out a little bit of an idea or a detail about local food that will spark some conversation. And so the first one that we're going to do is the pumpkin. And so I chose this specifically, Chloe, because I know that you are one of the most amazing pumpkin producers. I've eaten a variety of your different types of pumpkins. How many are you growing on the farm at the moment?
Well, right now there are none growing. They're all harvested for the year and in storage.
Exactly.
So we harvest pumpkins over autumn. This year we grew 12 different varieties. We've sort of narrowed down that selection over the past few years based on what we know grows well here, what we love eating, the most sort of stunning, best producers growing for flavour. A lot of the pumpkins you can buy in commercially are grown more specifically for storage life. We have the luxury of being able to grow things like our softer flesh pumpkins that you quite simply won't find in your average supermarket or retail space. We can grow those and sell them early in the season when they're very best. Our longer term storage pumpkins, things with a thicker skin but richer, maybe more developed flavour, or brilliant things to have winter round. And
they're great for storing for long periods of time, aren't they?
Very much, yeah. So you can grow so many different varieties of pumpkin with the intention of either having storage pumpkins or eat like you're growing, recognizing that over the season you'll be eating different pumpkins as well as
Absolutely.
getting flavor.
Absolutely. And I was doing some research. In the supermarkets we normally see around about, if we're lucky, 2 different types of pumpkins. But there's some 45 different pumpkins that are in commercial production in the world. And so it's, and one of the wonderful things about this idea of pumpkins connects back to this notion of biodiversity. And so local farms are always really great for biodiversity, in the sense that when you grow lots of different types of food, you encourage lots of different types of life onto your farm, as you were saying before, Chloe. And in fact, there are a lot of local producers who do this method, which is known as sort of regenerative farming or agroecology, inviting biodiversity and life onto their property, can generate greater environmental value than if the property was just left vacant to do its own thing. And so it's a great, eating local food's a great way to do that. All right, so the technique that we're going to be doing here, it's a roasted pumpkin, but it's a little bit of a twist. So the idea is it's inspired by a classic British roasted potato, in the sense that we're going to be doing it in a hot pan. And so I just peeled the pumpkin here. It's actually quite hard to chop pumpkin while sat down, but we can give it a go. And so what I like to do when I'm chopping up pumpkin for this particular dish is we want to try to create more surface area, because we're gonna put it into this hot pan with oil and then put that pan into the oven. And so what that's going to do is it's going to give a really beautiful color and caramelization on the bottom of the pan where it's touching the pan, but it's also going to roast in the oven. So it's like a double action cooking extravaganza. I don't know, sometimes when you're cooking pumpkin, if you're roasting it, it gets a little bit sweaty, a bit steamy in the oven, and that's a bit mushy, and it's not as nice as what I'm going to do here. So should we take notes, or will you be able to give us a copy of the recipe? We can absolutely give you a copy of the recipe. We'll send that around in an email later on. So with the pumpkin, one way that you can chop it so that you've got as much surface area as possible, so we can get some good color on here, is if you sort of just cut it into, let's say, batons like that. Boom, it's like a big chip. And then instead of just cutting it square, what you might want to do is cut it on a little bit of an angle. And so what that does is you end up with these kind of longer, elongated pieces of pumpkin, which has more surface area, and means that you're going to have more of that beautiful caramelization in the pan. So pop that on. It is a little bit of a hot and fast process. You do want to be careful not to burn your hands. Please don't do that. Chop that up, and then what we're going to do is get our wonderful mixing bowl and pop it in a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and a little splash of oil. Now, and also we're going to put a little bit of oil into the bottom of the pan. This is going to help for it to not stick, and it's also going to contribute to that really beautiful caramelized base. So it's probably around about 2 tablespoons worth of oil into that. So a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. Now, you can, if you like, add different types of spices to this to flavor it up. My general thoughts on this sort of thing is to try to keep all of your main ingredients that you're cooking natural. I like to keep them natural. The same with if I'm cooking any kind of meat or fish, I like to keep that just oil, salt, and pepper. And then when you're adding the flavor, you add that through the sauces, through the condiments, through the other things. What that means is that the pumpkin in this case is just going to cook, it's just going to caramelize on the flesh. Whereas if you were adding spices and other things, sometimes that can burn and it can catch a little bit and it doesn't end up being quite as nice. So that's my general theory about keeping things natural when you're cooking them. And so you may be able to see that this is nice and smoking hot. So this is what we're looking for. We want the oil to be reasonably hot when we're dropping this in, and that will help it from sticking to the pan, and we'll also get a really nice color. Right, so let's give this a go. Very gently pop that in, and you want to hear some of that really nice sound. This is the pumpkin saying, "Ben, you've done a good job here. This is the right thing that we're doing." So now what we want to do is let that sit for just around about 20 to 30 seconds. That's going to create that really nice caramelization on the bottom. And then we're going to pop it directly into the oven. I think that's getting pretty close. I've got the oven on here at 180 degrees or 190 degrees. And that's going to cook I'm going to start it at 20 minutes. And then we'll have a check after 20 minutes. What would the temperature be for the gas stove top? That's a hard question. It is a hard question to answer that. So I put it on high. You put in the oil, and when the oil starts to smoke, then you know it's ready. All right. So now I'm just going to put that directly into the oven. Bada bing, bada boom. Turn off that. Now you can use, I should have actually mentioned that before, so this is a cast iron pan, and actually I took off the handle. It had a wooden handle, and I thought that wooden handle is just getting in the way of me putting this cast iron pan in the oven, so I just took it off. But you can do it with a Le Creuset, anything that can be put on top of the stovetop and then into the oven, or you can put it into just a regular roasting tray. If you were doing it with a roasting tray, what you would do is put the oil into the roasting tray, put the whole tray in the oven, let that heat up for 10 minutes in the oven, and then gently pull it out, pour the pumpkins in, shake it up, and close the door. And so that will do the same thing, because the oil will be hot on the bottom of the tray. So you'll be cooking from the bottom and the top, double ways. Can we use a paella pan? Absolutely. I think a paella pan would work really nicely. Yep, perfect. Okay, so now let's move on to number 2. We are roaring through this. So oranges. Now, one of the topic of relating it back to what we're doing here today, local food, seasonality, oranges. Are oranges seasonal right now? Some people might say no. People will say oranges are good for the winter, right? It's not an autumn fruit. But in fact, there's different types of different varieties of plants can be coming into fruition at different times of the year. So I wanted to sort of stretch out this idea. This is this orange is actually a Valencian orange, which is coming good at the end of summer, whereas your classic navel orange has come into fruition in winter. Now, seasonality is a really great way to be able to engage with local food. As we know, local seasonal food is often more affordable because it's coming into abundance. And as we were saying before around tomatoes, when you allow food to, especially fresh produce, to fully grow into its ripened peak condition, then it actually draws up a lot of nutrients from the soil, and it makes that food more nutritious and more delicious. And a lot of the sort of industrial systems, and when the intention is for the economic or the export, they'll harvest a lot of food earlier when it's unripe, so that it will store for longer periods of time, and then they'll use particular processes or gases to ripen those fruits and vegetables at a particular time. And so one of the best things about seasonal food is that it's more nutritious and it's more delicious. How do we know what's in season? Talk to people like Chloe. I think this is the best way to be able to do this. Heading down to your local farmers market, if you've got a registered farmers market in your area where you can actually talk to the producer themselves or a farm worker, then you can find out exactly what's in season and what's coming on. Chloe, do you have anything to add about seasonality for that?
I'd also just like to highlight, like, it will just really awaken sort of your senses entirely. Like the taste of tomato at its peak, or the taste of, right now, brassicas are coming into season. Like, we've started getting frosts out here, which sweetens them up. You taste this, and it's what, once you've started eating this way as well, it's what your body craves. I don't want to look at another tomato again until, well, I'll start wanting them in December, and that's because our season's finished. I've enjoyed them over summer. Now my body's ready for something different. It's responding to the changing weather. Eating food that's in season is incredibly good for you as well. Like, your body gets that diversity of nutrients and flavors, and yeah, like, really, it just awakens your actual senses, and you will start to, like, identify food as being in season from its taste. Like, yeah,
absolutely. And there's something around this idea of, it's almost as if humans and the environment, food, have co-evolved together. So it's just when we need the most vitamin C is when those oranges come in, and that sort of idea. It's almost as if it was meant to be. Amazing.
Truly. It's also really interesting when you look at fruits and vegetables that are in season together. Over summer, you'll see a lot of reds and yellows. Over winter, like right now, you're seeing a lot of purples and oranges, as well as the really dark, vibrant greens. It's like they are, like, there is just a synchronicity or something that, yeah, like promoting these flavors and colors and
absolutely,
tastes.
Absolutely. All right, so what are we going to do with this beautiful seasonal orange? Is we're going to make it into a dressing. And so what we've got is, I've actually already juiced some for the interest of time. There's 5 oranges in here, juiced and then strained. And so what we're going to do simply is we're going to turn that on, and we are going to reduce the juice. This is what we're about today. What we're doing essentially is we are cooking out a lot of the sugars that are in the orange naturally, and we're going to cook it down to such a point that those sugars start to caramelize and they start to color a little bit. They sort of turn into this kind of darker, golden, amazing flavor. And then that is going to be the base for our vinaigrette, which we're going to add some oil and just a little bit of salt. And then that's going to be absolutely gorgeous. And for some reason, it feels like pumpkin and orange are one of those friends that always do well together. Maybe because they're both orange, but also I just feel like they're a good match made in heaven. Won't squeezing the oranges earlier make the juice sour? No, I think orange juice does last pretty well. I just squeezed this morning, so just to save a little bit of time. If you do prep it well in advance, then you will start to lose some of the vibrancy, some of that freshness of the juice. So I do recommend doing it just before. And again, it's another really great technique around preserving. So we were saying before, when fruits are in season, you're often in abundance. And anyone who's got an orange tree or a lemon tree knows that when it's on, it's on. You can't. You've got to think about what you can do with this wonderful fruit. And so making this dressing is actually a form of preserving as well. And so if you were to cook this down and pour it into a sterilized jar and then close it up and seal it, then you can hold on to that that reduction to use later on in the season. So it's another great way that you can actually preserve your food. So this will take around about 10 to 15 minutes, which should hopefully coincide beautifully with our roasted pumpkin, which is doing wonderfully. There was a little bit of steam, but we're good on that. All right, so the next component is a nut dukkha. Now I have some mixed nuts here, but what's the story? Why are we talking about nuts and local food? Now I've selected nuts intentionally, guys, because it's quite a controversial food. And the moral of this particular, the story behind this this component is, and I hate to try to make things more complicated or confuse anyone, is that just because it's local doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. So it's not that everything I've said up until this point is incorrect. It's just that there's a little bit more complexity to it. And so to illustrate this point, I'll tell you a little story about a research project. And so there was a research project based in the UK, you guys might have heard of this one, where they were looking at the embodied energy or embodied carbon in lamb. And so they were comparing the embodied energy of UK lamb that was produced in the UK against lamb that was produced in New Zealand and then imported into the UK. So it was produced and then brought over. And so they did the analysis and they found that the New Zealand lamb had some 680 kilograms of carbon per ton. They thought, wow, that's quite a lot. Surely the local lamb will be much better. And so then they looked at the local lamb and did all the calculations. And it turned out that the local lamb had some 2,800 kilograms of CO2 per ton, some 4 times as much. At first, they were like, these results can't be right. The local's got to be better, surely. But when they teased it out and they started to look into the details, and they realized that the New Zealand lamb was produced in an area which had lots of rainfall, good sun, and the grass would grow really well. And basically these sheep were 100% pasture raised. They just lived there, they ate the grass, and then they went on. The UK lamb were grown in conditions which weren't as well suited for sheep production. They needed to bring in feed from outside, and that feed that was being produced, that was on land that needed to be chopped down from all their trees. They grew different types of grains, which of course required fertilizers and pesticides. Then those grains needed to be cut down and processed, and then that food needed to be shipped into the UK to be fed to the lamb. And so what they found is that actually the transportation value or carbon value was around about 15% only, and that it was far more embodied energy in the way that things are being produced as opposed to where it's being produced. I have just got a question. Do store the bottle in the fridge once sealed? You can store it, just on the orange, you can store it in the fridge. You can actually store it out as long as you've got a sterilized jar and it's nice and sealed, then you can store it out. And then one more question, are there pistachios in the nut mix? No, there's no pistachios in this nut mix. But so just coming back, so the idea is that that local food isn't always the best, but what we can do is try to think and be a little bit critical around where our food's coming from and how it's being produced. And again, it's not just about where it's being produced, but it is about how. And one way, again, that we can think about this is the intention that underpins these production methods. If one of the values of that producer is to generate good environmental conditions, food that's nourishing for themselves and for their community, then as a rule of thumb, then it's going to be a better option. Nuts have chosen specifically because it's quite a controversial crop. On one side, we have people telling us we need to be eating alternative types of protein, and nuts are a good way to do that, reducing our red meat. Whereas on the other side, nuts are very water intensive things to grow. And we all know that water is becoming a more of an issue these days. And so one way that we can do that again is to be critical, is to think about and to tease out some of the specifics. So I went to my local market and spoke to a nut reseller. And these nuts here were produced in the Mediterranean, and they are using all sorts of amazing water saving techniques and technologies. So they've identified that water is a big concern when producing nuts, and so they're using techniques to try to reduce their water intake. They're doing that by building up complexity in the soil and water retention in the soil as their main approach, so that when it rains, instead of the water just running off, it's kept in the soil, and then it's made more available for that production. Did you want to add anything to that, Chloe?
Yeah, so nuts is a particularly good example. With things like water use, also growing in monocultures is a huge problem. So a lot of nuts are grown in, and some areas are only suited to producing one or two different types of crops. Don't get me wrong, but growing in a monoculture, like I'll take almonds, for example. We grow a lot of almonds in quite a dry area at the end of the Murray in Australia. They're also grown, a lot of the almonds you'll get across the world are grown in California, in a state that is just seeing absolute water devastation. And it's also like, you look at the devastation to populations of bees and insects there. So bees are being brought in as pollinators. You're having mass bee die-offs. Bees are like anything else. They need diversity in pollen, and if we're using all the water to just grow almonds, we're not growing other species, we're not allowing them to thrive, we're knocking down native species or other types of food sources for these bees. They're not going to survive year round. You're also shipping bees across the country, like you're taking bees to different places across the country according to what needs to be pollinated at that time. That puts incredible stress on bee populations. And honestly, without bees, we're really going to see a massive disappearance of the foods we most love. And
really,
but there is a good way to grow nuts, and like we just again need to be intentional about the way we do it and think about the consequence of our actions and what we can do to improve our ecosystem. And eating a really good way for people to contribute to improving our environment.
Absolutely. And so there's one great hazelnut producer in Victoria called Carbor, and they seem to be really considerate about their production methods into growing hazelnuts in a really great way. So I just had a quick squiz at the pumpkin, and it's looking great, guys. So that's just gonna, I reckon, another 10 minutes. I think it's been about 10 minutes so far. We're might be cutting it a bit close, but we'll finish in time. The orange juice is starting to cook down, as you can see. This is excellent progress. This is exactly where we want to be. Now let's move on to our dukkha. Now you guys may have heard of dukkha before. It's on a lot of breakfast menus in Melbourne and around the world these days. It is an extremely versatile and delicious garnish or condiment. All it really is some nuts and some spices. That's what it is at its core. The cool thing about this recipe is that you can be super flexible based on your taste, based on your preference, and actually what you have just kicking around at home. And so for this pumpkin dish, I have just selected 3 spices, which is sweet ground cinnamon. A little bit unusual, but I feel like cinnamon and pumpkins are friends. Ground turmeric, that's going to add a really nice bright yellow pop to the dish. And then we've got some smoked paprika. So it's a little bit of a sweet savory combo, which I think ties in really nicely with the sweet savory notion of pumpkin and with the orange. So I have my trusty blitzer, all ready to go. This is 1 cup worth of mixed nuts. Now in here, we have some walnuts, we have some cashews, we have some Brazil nuts, and they are all roasted off. So these ones are actually, I bought roasted. If they are unroasted, I really recommend that you do roast them beforehand. That's just going to make a richer, darker, and also crunchier dukkha at the end. That's what we're looking for. Now for 1 cup, and I will send around the recipe, for 1 cup worth of nuts, for my taste, I like to have 3 teaspoons of spices. And so I'm going to go ahead and go 1 teaspoon of the turmeric. Oh, it smells delightful. We're going to go 1 teaspoon of the paprika. That's nice. And then we're going to go 1 teaspoon of the cinnamon, wild. You can use anything. If you've got like spices that are sort of kicking around the house that, you know, from that one time that you bought for a specific recipe and you want to use it up, then it's a great way to be able to use it up. Once you've got this in a jar, then you can use it for lots and lots of different stuff. So I like my dukkha to be a little bit chunky. I don't want it to turn into anything too smooth. You're at risk of it turning into a nut butter, a spicy nut butter, if you pulse it too much or if you blend it too much. So the way I like to do it is just to pulse on and off with the blitzer. So I'm going to do that. Five times seems about the appropriate amount. And then just put this down over here. As you can see, you've got this beautiful, crunchy, nut, spicy, delicious, and also a little pinch of salt. I think that will help to bind everything together. And then what I normally do is just pop it into a jar. And this here will store in a jar for weeks and weeks, just like regular nuts will. Again, I always find that with things like a dukkha, it's the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And so if you've got some, if you have some spices kicking around, if you have some nuts that are in the fridge or in the pantry, sorry, roast them up, blitz them up, and then you have this wonderful dukkha that you can use on lots and lots of different dishes. Some of the things that I like to do with this include putting it on scrambled eggs, very nice, on poached eggs, also good. Garnishing salads, as we're going to be doing today, that's nice. And also putting it on sort of braises or roasts, that sort of thing. If I was doing you know, like a chicken, braised chicken or a braised lamb shoulder, for example, I might sprinkle a little bit of this delicious dukkha on top for a little crunchy, savory, delicious sort of burst of flavor. So it's very, very delicious and very versatile. A few questions here. So it would be good to find out about the hazelnut grower in Victoria. Yes, absolutely. So they're called Carboor, if I'm getting it right, Carboor. So check them out. I can send around a link to that. Thank you, Belinda, for coming along. I have to shoot off. And can you remind us what type of oil you used in the pumpkin? So I've just got some olive oil, just some light colored olive oil. I find that cooking with extra virgin olive oil doesn't produce the best flavors. And when you heat olive oil, then you denature some of the live components of the oil, and which isn't necessarily good for your health, but it doesn't taste as good either. All right, so I did put on a clock before, and I have 1.5 minutes to go before my 20 minutes is up. So I'm just going to leave that. And my orange reduction is getting pretty close, but again, that's going to be 5 minutes as well. So we're going to be going to be perfectly on time. Well done. It's as if we planned this. Amazing. That can be stored, like I said, for months. It's a beautiful little garnish condiment. All right. Last but not least, it's not actually a cooked item, but it's a chatting item, and we're going to be talking about goat's cheese. So the story, the reason why we're talking about goat's cheese is to kind of go on from this. Just because it's local doesn't mean it's good. The idea is that just because it's manufactured locally doesn't mean that or it is in fact good or it is in fact local. And so to illustrate, I recently, part of my master's program, I did this assignment, which was a value chain analysis. And we were looking at organic chicken, which is produced and sold here in the UK. So when I started to dig down into the specifics, the different stages or actors in this value chain, we found out that there was some 15 different steps and actors that were involved in this production of this chicken. It went from the international genetics breeding company to the grandparent stockholders, to the parent stockholders, to the one-day-old chicks, to the hatcheries, then on to the farms. The feed was being produced in Brazil and then harvested and then shipped in. And then there's some 8 different stages in the processing site, moving around and processing. That's our 20 minutes. And so what was communicated and sort of marketed as a locally sourced, locally sold product was actually a combination of a very, very wide array of international actors doing lots of things which weren't immediately transparent. And so I guess the conversation around this is I'd love to talk about the idea of supply chains and long versus short supply chains. And one of the reasons why local food is really amazing is because it's such short supply chains. It means that we know exactly where our food is coming from. Like we were saying before, because things don't have to travel as far or go through as many stages, we can produce food that's fresher and juicier and more vibrant as opposed to, in full ripeness. All of those steps require infrastructure, inputs, and people, of course, which kind of adds to the impact and to the the environmental impact, for example, of that product. And then the other thing that I always think about is the workers. If we just think about it for a second and we think, if you're buying a chook from the shop for, $10 and it's gone through 15 different stages, how well do we think that that farmer's being paid for their work? And what about the Brazilian farmer that's producing the grains? And what about those factory workers? And so one of the things that is really great about local food, and for example, I can purchase food directly from Chloe, and I know that money is going directly to Chloe and to her staff, and will also be yielding these other environmental and social values that are associated with her type of production. And so there's the one way that we can think about this is really, again, just to tease out a little bit, to dig in a little bit more into where is our food coming from, how is it being produced, and what's the intention underneath that. Chloe, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Again, with workers, like employing people it's a massive responsibility. It's something I feel really strongly about. Like, agriculture has often been treated as a bit of an industry that people work in because they're desperate for jobs, they're overseas workers, they're people that don't have other skills. That's really not the case. Mm-hmm. Agriculture is an incredibly, there are heaps of opportunities in the industry. You have a massive skill set. There are so many different things, so many different roles people working in agriculture fill. Mm-hmm. And paying workers properly and treating it as a real industry, not just something people do as seasonal work or anything like that. That it's a real job, and it's I think for far too long. And I think this current crisis has probably exposed a lot of the flaws in our current agricultural model. But having a really, we've lost access to, or the larger industry has lost access to that cheap workforce of people that are easy to exploit, or not live up to your social obligations. And yeah, by buying directly from a farmer or working, there are also quite a few like you don't have to buy directly from a farmer, but there are lots of places that are selling from that shortened supply chain, and more money goes back into the local community, directly to the staff, directly to the farmer. And just realizing by cutting out like that 15-step middleman chain, you're really going to see so many more benefits to the community. You're going to it's just better for our society and for everyone, and it will make agriculture more viable and more sustainable. Oh, and one other thing as well, we were talking about the length of the supply chain. Also, when I harvest produce, I've been at Market Day, and I'll get another one tomorrow, or stuff will be anyway. So I harvested the food for that market yesterday. It went into my cold room overnight and came out this morning.
Yeah.
No
amazing.
And refrigeration. If you're harvesting food weeks in advance, cold room storage, sometimes you'll be eating food that was harvested a year ago. You think about the embodied energy that goes into producing that food simply for storage, for keeping it in that cold room. And it's simply a matter of convenience for large producers and large retailers. We can save so much energy by just really having that fresh food that has just come out of the ground. Absolutely.
And having eaten and cooked with a lot of your food over the years, it's unbelievable. It's so fresh, it's so delicious. You can really taste it when it is fresh from the farm. And it's a joy to be able to cook with and eat. All right, so we've done it pretty much. Now it's time to plate it up. Let's see if we can do this. So first up, let's have a look at this delicious pumpkin. Now, when I press this pumpkin, it is nicely textured. It is not sweaty and gross. It is held up its shape really nicely, and I think you should be able to see that, like this, for example, caramelization on that one side, but then freshly kind of roasted on that side makes for an absolutely delightful eating experience. As I said at the beginning, this is a classic kind of like a roasted potato sort of British style of preparation, but it works very, very well for the pumpkin and for other types of vegetables as well. A classic one is cauliflower. That is the king of the sweaty vegetable, and if we just put that in the oven, all that moisture is just going to come out and make it sweaty. Doing this technique with your roasted cauliflower means that it's crunchy but caramelized. It's the best. It's the match made in heaven. All right, so our orange vinaigrette is absolutely pretty much done. I was going to, in fact, I'll do it this way. I was going to pop it into a jar, add some oil, and then shake it up, but it's quite hot. So I'm not going to do that because I'm worried that it's going to explode in my face. So instead, I'm going to pop it into this jar, into this bowl, sorry. And then I'm just going to add the oil manually. And so I'm not sure if you can see that, but it has a beautiful sort of velvety thickness to it. It's about 2 or 3 times as thick as if it's just fresh orange juice. And actually, a very quick sort of fun side tip is that if you excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to pop into my fridge. It's going to be worth it. Find it. Now, if anyone makes jam or any kind of cooking down a sauce, and you think to yourself, this sauce is really hot, and I don't know what consistency this is going to be when it is cool. Chef tip number 430, get a plate, pop it in the fridge, get the hot sauce, and pop it on the cold plate. That instantly cools down the sauce and will show you the texture that the sauce will be when it is cold. And so you can see from that, this very artistic rendition is that, that this is, in fact, a syrup. It has been reduced down, and when this hot liquid cools, it will be the perfect consistency for what we are going for. So that's a little trick that we use in the restaurants when we're testing for sauces and things like that. So what we're going to do is just add a little bit of oil into our orange, and around about, I normally go 2 parts of the orange reduction with 1 part of the oil. And that basically just turns it from a sticky kind of sauce into more of a vinaigrette, and that's going to add a nice flavor and a nice pop as well. And so we're going to drizzle that on top of our pumpkin. That's going to be the delicious flavorsome burst. And what we've got here, we've got the acid from the oranges, we've got the sweetness from the oranges, and then we've got the salt, and that's going to create this beautiful, well-rounded, full-flavored sort of sauce to tie it together. Next, we have our beautiful locally sourced goat's cheese. And actually, Chloe, funnily enough, this goat's cheese is from Somerset, which I got because your farm is called Somerset. I thought that would be a nice little tie-in. Pop that on like that. And then last but not least, we have our beautiful mixed nut dukkha. And that is going to add a lovely crunch to tie it all together. That beautiful, savory, spicy, nutty crunch. And there we have it. Let's try to make this visible. We have our beautiful roasted pumpkin with our orange sauce, goat's cheese, and a mixed nut dukkha to finish it off. How does that all look, guys? Delicious? Yum? I can only assume. Everyone's on mute, so I'm just going to assume that everyone loves it. And that brings us to the end of our workshop. Only 3 minutes over time. That's pretty good. Look, I'm going to kick around, but we can stay around for another 5 or 10 minutes if anyone has any last questions. But look, thank you so much again for attending this workshop. It's been a joy having you in my home for the last hour. Again, we're going to be sending around a survey. So if you can please fill that out, then that would be absolutely amazing. And if you've got any questions for myself or for Chloe, then you can just email me through the Eventbrite link. My email's in those details. Also, we have 3 more of these workshops, 3 more weeks worth of fun. We've had some people who have been a bit confused, but we do need to sign up each week for each workshop. So if you haven't signed up for the other ones and you do want to come along, then you can do that. Again, I'll say goodbye to the people that do need to leave now, but I will be kicking around for another 10 minutes or so. So thanks everyone for coming along, and thank you, Chloe, for spending the last hour with us and for sharing your amazing knowledge and skills. It's a joy to have you here and to be able to work with you professionally and personally. So thank you.
Such a pleasure, Ben, and thank you to everyone.
Wonderful. All right. So we got any other questions? Very nice. Can make it, yep, using some fresh produce. Can't wait to try and use. Very good. You recommend a good reading on food production you discussed. Yes, absolutely. So one of my favorite authors who talks a lot about these sorts of broad food system issues is Michael Pollan. His book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, is a really great book to read, which goes into the details around food and the intersection between food and health, and some of these big global players and actors that influence how we're producing and eating food. Another really great one, because I'm a chef, is Dan Barber, The Third Plate. Again, a really great discussion around how we're producing food for restaurants and for general consumption is impacting on the ecology of the planet. So it's a really great piece. Chloe, do you have any books that you would recommend for people to read up on this topic?
Sorry. Good reading on food production. I'm just thinking of all my farming gods. Anyone interested in farming, I'd recommend reading into Joel Salatin. Is a great and very accessible resource. He's written really widely for vegetable farmers. There are so many good vegetable farmers out there that share a lot of information, and as a layperson even, you can gain so much insight into food production, and it really gives you a good background into like a framework through which to question, to ask those questions. So people like Elliot Coleman, I could go on, and also I'd also just like to state before I forget, I'd recommend both attending farmers markets is a great way to connect with local producers and to really get a feel for what is in season and for producing and how they're doing it. Look for certified local farmers markets, because sometimes farmers markets might not actually be farmers. You want to be going to certified farmers markets for real farmers. Also, there is an incredible not-for-profit group called the Open Food Network, which facilitates connections and runs stores for producers. They're across Australia. You can literally connect with, they run farmers stores. And it's a really good way to see who's growing around you and actually just directly source food from those people. It's also available in the UK and in several European countries and in Canada. And it's all started by some wonderful women who live 50 kilometres up the road from me and do this because they want to promote local food and connections with local growers. So that's Open Food Network.
Very cool. Couple of other quick messages. This recipe would be amazing for cold weather. Perfect for right now. How do we find out about the chain of production that we buy? Talking to farmers, attending farmers markets, as Chloe said. Often you'll find that locally sourced food and food that has short supply chains or ethical supply chains often communicate them, because this is one of the things that they care about and that they want to promote. And so it's not always, a correlation doesn't imply causation, but if there's a lack of information, sometimes that can be telling as well. If you're looking and you can't find out how things are being produced, then you might start to question, what's going on there. But I do find that going to farmers markets and talking directly to farmers is one of the best ways to be able to find out about how food's being produced. I love going to local farmers markets and talking to artisans, talking to the bakers and the cheese makers and the charcuterie people, as they have a really great knowledge about their supply chains and often are really, really happy to share that information with you. So that's really great. Yes, I can write up some tips. So yeah, I'll write up this recipe and I can add some other tips into that document and can send around to you guys. And perfect. Another question, any culinary colleges that you would recommend? So in Melbourne, William Angliss is probably the best one. Actually, William Angliss does a really great, they do culinary schools where you can learn to be a cook. They also do a bachelor and a master's of gastronomy, which is a little bit more of a holistic sort of bachelor and master's program that looks at food system issues as well as, and they do also incorporate some of those cooking techniques as well. So if you're interested, the William Angliss does both of those courses, so definitely worth talking to them. All right, so if there's not any other burning questions, then I think we might wrap up for this week. Again, thank you so much for coming along, and thank you, Chloe. Really great to have this conversation with you. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. If you've got any questions, please send me an email. But otherwise, have a wonderful week and speak to you soon. All right. Cheers, everyone.